Kia ora koutou and welcome to the 3-Minute Board Games Top 100 Games of All Time list for 2020. As always, let's get some basic things out of the way. This list is my list. It's not your list, it's not anyone else's list. And it's certainly not a definitive list. Games are ranked on here solely because of how I like them and how frequently I play them. If a game isn't on this list, there's a good chance I haven't played it. But there's also a chance I have played it and I didn't like it as much as you did. There are a couple of things to mention about the list. First, down here will be the game's rating out of 100, and down here will be the difference in rating between the 2020 list and the 2019 list. If a game's gone up, it'll be green. If a game's gone down, it will be red. And a new thing this year is that we are including members of the Kia Kaha Club, our $5 patrons who had the opportunity to endorse games that they also think should be in the top 100. These endorsements will appear on each game where relevant. And of course, all of our long-form content is made possible by Patreon. So if you want to see more videos like this and more long-form videos, please sign up and support us. And today we are also launching the 3-Minute Board Game Store. If you want to pick up some mugs or some t-shirts, including a cool one based on this top 100, pop along there and use the discount code shown on the screen. It should be valid until the end of 2020. And with all that stuff out of the way, let's get on to the list. Number 100, Gizmos. A super fun little engine building game about pulling marbles out of a dispenser and coming up with heaps of different ways to use and modify them. Has a lot of what I love about Potion Explosion, but with even more engine building. But is a step up in terms of complexity. Number 99, The Networks. A great card drafting game about running a television network. The core gameplay of The Networks is really solid, but what makes the game for me is its wacky theme and how charmingly it's executed. Number 98, Chaos in the Old World. An out-of-print and really hard-to-get classic game from Eric Lang. Chaos in the Old World lets you play 4 completely asymmetric gods locked in dire combat. It's also hugely influential on his later games, Blood Rage and Rising Sun. Probably the best pure board game ever made for Warhammer. 97. Imperial Spells and Steam. The most over-the-top train game you will ever play. A weird combination of the things you'd normally expect in a train game, such as building networks and delivering goods, combined with engine building and spellcasting. Plus, this game is absolutely gorgeous to look at. One of 2 train games I played this year that convinced me that I don't hate train games. 96. Villages. A small box game that's definitely bigger on the inside. Easy to learn, quick to play, but with enough depth that you feel engaged by it. I'm also really keen to see if the sequel to this, Streets, can top it. Number 95. PAVLOVS House. A fascinating solo board game about the Battle of Stalingrad that goes all the way from the strategic level right down to the individual soldiers inside Pavlov's house. No wargame I've ever played has captured from the strategic level to the tactical level so seamlessly. And unlike a lot of solo wargames, not overwhelmingly complex. Number 94, Galilean Moons. It's third year on the top 100, and it's still the best area control game you haven't played. But hopefully that changes for a lot of people soon, as I believe this is finally delivering from Kickstarter very shortly. Galilean Moons is what I call a pure area control game. It's tight, it's thinky, and it has some incredibly clever systems in it. And eventually you'll be hearing praises about this game from people other than me. Number 93, Steampunk Rally. Wacky races, turn-of-the-century scientists, engine building and racing in one game? Steampunk Rally is wonderfully silly, but with the incredibly complex engines you can build, also stunningly engaging as well. Really looking forward to the expansion to this when it comes out. One to pick up if you love racing games and you like engine building as well. And frankly, there should be more engine building racing games, shouldn't there? Number 92, OAXACA, Crafts of a Culture. Still one of my favorite small box games. I can't think of a game that crams more decisions into its playtime than OAXACA Crafts of a Culture. And while it's got a wonderfully cute and engaging theme, what brings me back to this is that it's a small game I can take with me anywhere that delivers as much gameplay as a standard big box game. And it's amazing how sprawling and complex the engines you can build in this one are. Number 91, Paydirt. An auctioning and optimization game about gold mining in the Yukon. I think this one's really hard to get these days, but I am a sucker for this theme, having watched entirely too much Gold Rush on TV. Mining just lends itself really well to board gaming, so I'm kind of surprised there's not more games about this out there. But why Paydirt's one of my favorite games is because everything in the game makes sense. Equipment breaks down, and better equipment makes your organization more efficient, but so can better ground. So it's a matter of managing your limited resources to get the best optimization and gold recovery you can. Number 90, The Isle of Cats. I've not played many polynomino games before, and Isle of Cats was a real revelation to me this year. When I first saw the idea for the game, I thought it was total nonsense. Then I played it, and there's something incredibly compelling about trying to stack these cats onto this damn boat. A really good one for families, and a really good one for people who like solving puzzles. It comes with a designated place to store your cat, and if you don't have a cat, well, you can store 1 or 2 guinea pigs in there instead. Number 89, Martians, A Story of Civilization. Still the worst rulebook I've ever read for any game ever. That said, this is still the best worker placement game set on Mars that I've played, and it does some really clever things, not least of which is having solo, co-op, competitive, and semi-co-op rules within the same game that only require a few tweaks. This combined with a wealth of scenarios and good core gameplay give this game a huge amount of replayability. Definitely a game that was punished because of how bad its rulebook was. So publishers, take note. A bad rulebook can sink a good game. Number 88, Nemo's War. A solo game about being Captain Nemo at the head of the Nautilus. Several things make this game stand out. Its fantastic narrative and really rich theme, along with push your luck dice mechanics, add up for an interesting and tense experience. Another standout of this is that you can change Nemo's motivation at the start of the game. His motivation determines what things score different victory points, so you end up playing very differently if you have the explore motivation compared to if you have the war motivation. Just don't believe the lies that this is a game for 1 to 4 players. It's a solo game. Only get it if you plan to play solo. Number 87, Takenoko. Takenoko is really just a family game about a panda that loves bamboo, and a poor farmer who just really wants his bamboo to grow unmolested. And it's the charm of this game that makes it so compelling, and makes it such a family-friendly experience. You have to have a heart of stone not to go nom 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 when the panda is moving across the board. Not the greatest game for people who take their games super seriously, but for families and more casual events, an absolute winner. Number 86, Star Wars Imperial Assault. One of my favorite dungeon crawlers. It takes everything I like from Descent 2nd Edition and none of the things I hated from Descent 2nd Edition and turns them into a much better game. It's a quality dungeon crawler in its own right, but it's really the Star Wars theme that elevates this one to the next level. And if you are a fan of Star Wars and do like dungeon crawling games, I have to ask why you don't already have this. Oh, perhaps you're waiting for the 2nd edition that's almost certainly going to come out after Descent 3rd Edition. Number 85, The Reckoners, a cooperative dice manipulation game in a setting where the superheroes are all supervillains. In the world of The Reckoners, Steelheart is a superpowered evildoer, and you and your friends have to take him down. The Reckoners takes all of the stuff I loved in Elder Sign and just makes it better. It's not one player taking their turn and resolving it, everyone acts at much the same time, so you can take actions to boost other people's effects, and coordinate and work together. The Reckoners does suffer a little from I was on Kickstarter scenario, so the game is not cheap and it is hella overproduced, but in this case, the game itself makes it worthwhile. Number 84, Last Friday, a hidden movement game that is not at all a blatant rip-off of Friday the 13th, and yet somehow is a better Friday the 13th game than any games based on that IP, or just about any other horror IP for that matter. Last Friday takes all the tropes of the horror slasher series and turns them into an engaging, back and forth hidden movement game. Because unlike most hidden movement games, the hunter can become the hunted. And it's that flipping about of the roles and the change of pace in the middle of the game of Last Friday that sets it apart from other hidden movement games for me. Number 83, Caverna, The Cave Farmers. My favorite of the Rosenberg worker placement games. This is very much a heavy Euro, pure worker placement game where you'll have to make a lot of hard decisions. If you're looking for a solid, heavy worker placement game that you'll be able to get a lot of play out of, you can do a lot worse than Caverna. Number 82, Dawn of the Zeds, 3rd edition. Dawn of the Zeds hates me, and I think it hates humanity. This is a solo-only defense game where you're trying to stop hordes of zombies from swarming over a town. And by trying to stop, I mean that you're not actually going to stop them. Brutally harsh and unforgiving, yet it has that rare gift some games do of creating memorable story moments. And while it has a massive rules overhead, and it's intimidating with its 5 rulebooks, if you can't commit the time to Dawn of the Zeds, it will just keep generating moments you can remember. Number 81, XCOM the board game. Inspired by the classic XCOM computer game series, XCOM the board game is something quite different. This was the game that showed me what apps can do in board games. They're not just about recording data, they can be used to create a unique experience, and XCOM delivers just that. Sitting around the table, you'll have all this information coming into you from the app that you have to react to in real time. And that's something that could not be achieved using cards or another analog method. XCOM is a wonderfully frantic cooperative experience and a staggeringly frantic solo one. Definitely try it out if tension is your idea of fun. Number 80, Android, the game I most want to see get a second edition. This is the game that created the Android universe, later used by games such as NETRUNNER. And it's a sweeping epic story about a conspiracy and an investigation and these deep, rich characters. And while I'd never call it the tightest or most well-designed game ever made, its scope and ambition is absolutely amazing. Android remains my favorite board game experiment. A crazy idea that probably shouldn't have worked, but that somehow ended up getting published. And I recommend giving it a go just to experience the world building in this game. And now I have to ask why there isn't an Android LCG based on the Arkham Horror LCG. There's so much FFG could do with this world. Number 79, Space Cadets. Speaking of real-time chaos, Space Cadets is another co-op game that uses real-time elements. In this case, you're all playing the bridge crew on a starship, but not one of those competent starships like the Enterprise. You're much more like the crew of Red Dwarf. Space Cadets is held together by a series of wacky mini-games, and it's everyone desperately trying to stick to a plan and solve their mini-game in the right way in a limited amount of time that adds a wonderful amount of chaos to it. A hilarious co-op experience that will either bring your friends together or make you want to kill them all. Number 78, Legendary Encounters, an alien deck building game. I keep trying to like other games in the Legendary and Legendary Encounters system, and it's just not happening. Every time I play one of the other ones, it just makes me like the alien game more. And that's because it takes the best bits of the Legendary system, turns it into the Legendary Encounter system, which feels like it was made with aliens in mind. Cards moving face down through the vents that you have to scan to figure out what they do, and a laundry list of iconic characters you can include in your deck. The way the missions and stories are structured also makes a heck of a lot of sense, and it just nails its theme far better than any other game in this series. Definitely a game for people who want a good co-op deck builder, and especially a game for people who like Alien and Aliens. Number 77, Scythe. One of the games that defined the 2010s. A beautiful looking game that combines elements from Eurogaming such as action optimization and resource management, along with elements from American style games like area control and combat wheels and combat cards. Scythe is a broad crossover hit, and there's definitely a lot to love here. And while the core gameplay is super solid, what really stands out to me about Scythe is just its board presence. Especially when it's painted up and you're playing a big game, it just looks and feels epic. Number 76, werq, Dawn of Kiev. A game that has quite a bit in common with Scythe in terms of how it combines Euro and American style mechanics. What's really elevated werq for me is its action programming system, and if you haven't checked this out, definitely do. On top of that, it's just a solid area control sort of game, but that one mechanic, that one key point of difference really makes a difference here. Number 75, Lords of Waterdeep. Lords of Waterdeep could be considered very much a standard worker placement game. You place workers, you get cubes, you turn cubes into points. And many say the theme feels pasted on. And it kinda is, but it kind of doesn't matter, because they're just strong enough hooks that if you're familiar with fantasy settings and fantasy tropes, then the entire game makes sense. And that's Lords of Waterdeep's secret sauce, that it's just a really solid worker placement game with just enough theme to get its hooks into people and to keep their interest long enough for them to discover that there's a genuinely good game here. Number 74, Twilight Imperium. There is so much to like in Twilight Imperium, and it delivers a deep, rich 4X experience for a big group of people. In terms of scope and scale, few games can compare to it. I'd rate it a lot higher if I could get it to the table more. And that's the thing with event games like this. They are spectacular. They create amazing stories and experiences, but as an event game, it's not something you're going to be playing every week, or every month, or in some cases, every year. So while I do love Twilight Imperium and everything it brings to the table, it just takes a lot of effort to bring it to the table. Number 73, DUNE. I think it was about this time last year that I joked that DUNE would never ever get a reprint, and here we are a year later with DUNE on the table with a flash new edition and an expansion. DUNE suffers from some of the same problems as Twilight Imperium 4th edition, but it plays quite a bit quicker. It also has the narrative hook of the DUNE setting that draws people in. But what makes DUNE is its brutality. This is one of the most unforgiving games ever designed. So if you love games of lots of table talk, wheeling and dealing, and managing large quantities of risk in order to win, definitely have a go at DUNE. Number 72, TERRA Mystica. A very heavyweight Euro game about different fantasy races using terraforming magic to their own advantage. There is a lot happening in TERRA Mystica, and it's one of those games that you will take multiple plays to really learn. But it presents a fascinating and interesting challenge. You need to build close to your opponents in order to get benefits off them, but you also can't allow yourself to get locked in, leading to some really tight and nasty decisions that get made through the game. I only played TERRA Mystica for the first time in the last 12 months, and the reason for that is I initially looked at the game and went, it's about terraforming, and they went with a fantasy theme and not a sci-fi theme? How bizarre. And I will talk about that sci-fi theme a little bit later. But TERRA Mystica in and of itself is one of those really chunky Euros that has that high player interaction. Number 71, Sentinels of the Multiverse. This cooperative superhero-based game is probably the best superhero game on the market. And I say that because I don't really care about Marvel or DC characters. Not at all. One of the things I love about Sentinels is they made their own characters, and I respect that a lot more than just slapping Hawkeye on something and saying, hey, this guy shoots a bow. I guess his card abilities will involve bows and arrows then. Sentinels captures the feel of a great big superhero boss fight. But because they were able to create their own world, they could create mechanics that worked for the world and link them to the characters, rather than trying to shoehorn established characters into a game mechanic system. One of the great features of Sentinels of the Multiverse is that each of the characters has their own deck and has their own powers baked into that deck. And this means that their character just flows naturally throughout the course of the game. Number 70, Century Golem Edition. Century Spice Road is a very simple set collection game that's fast-paced and has a lot of wonderful decisions in it. Century Golem Edition is the same game, only a lot prettier. Century is one of my go-to games when we don't have a lot of time to play something else, or if I'm teaching people who are unfamiliar with complex games. Definitely one of the most family-friendly titles in my collection. Number 69, Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This tile drafting, castle building game remains one of my favorites, even if I haven't played it much in the last year. There's something supremely satisfying about the wacky castles you end up building in order to satisfy the demands of the Mad King. And while the visual aspect of building these castles is really appealing, the one fly in the ointment for this game for me is the auction system. It just slows the game down a little too much. Still a fascinating game, and one I'd recommend to anyone who likes mid-weight Euros and likes the idea of having a castle that you've built at the end of the game. Number 68, Freedom, the Underground Railroad. This is a cooperative game about moving slaves from plantations to safety in Canada during the era of slavery in the US. That's a serious topic, and the game takes it very seriously. And while I can't speak too much about how well the history has been portrayed here, I can say that the actual gameplay of Freedom, the Underground Railroad is really intense. You have so few actions you can take throughout the course of the game, and each of those actions has to be important. There are no dull or wasted turns, at least not if you want to win. And it's that tightness and tension in Freedom, the Underground Railroad that make it a really compelling co-op game. That and the theme, of course. Number 67, It's a Wonderful World! This card drafting engine builder is a game that's new to me this year, and it's quickly become one of my favorite games. And that's because it crams a lot of decisions into a very small time frame. A game of It's a Wonderful World takes about 30 minutes, and throughout that period, your brain is engaged the whole time. Its wacky, slightly nonsensical theme actually really appeals to me, as it makes things like searching for Atlantis quite memorable. But really, this is a game for people who want an engine builder but don't want to spend 2 hours playing it. And if that sounds appealing, definitely check it out. Number 66, Agents of SMERSH. Sadly, this storytelling game is out of print and probably never will return to print, as the company that made it and the designer have gone out of business. What this is, though, is it's James Bond and Austin Powers classic 1960s spy tropes as an adventure board game. Mechanically, it's a little all over the place, but it has this huge book of stories and encounters. So you don't necessarily play the game to win, you play the game to go on adventures, and it's like a more refined version of Tales of the Arabian Nights in that regard. Definitely one to try out if your idea of fun is breaking into an evil mastermind's secret lair to find their mind control lasers. A few judo chops here and there and some silenced PPK shots later, and your characters are escaping across the desert in a souped up jeep. And that's what makes SMERSH fun. Silly, over-the-top spy stories. Number 65, Architects of the West Kingdom. Architects of the West Kingdom is a mid-weight worker placement game with one real shining point of difference, and that is that there's no phase where you take your workers off the board. Workers stay on the board, building up steadily until other players take an action to arrest them to claim money. And this creates a flow that you don't normally see in worker placement games. In a lot of games in that genre, everyone places and tries to get the best spots first, and spots get worse and worse as the turn goes on. In Architects, the turns just keep flowing, so it's a matter of getting what you can before someone notices you've got too many people on an area and takes an action to arrest them. And unlike a lot of worker placement games, it actually works better at higher player counts. So if you routinely have 4 or 5 people playing, definitely consider picking up Architects. Number 64, Ketos. Ketos is a gem of a game. We did a free video for its Kickstarter simply because we thought it was a fantastic game. I was initially cagey about this tiny, cheap, small box word game, and then we played it. Practically everyone we've played it with has wanted to get their own copy. And what is it? It's a really simple word game, but it's a word game that instantly draws you in. It takes minutes to teach, but it appeals to families. And this is one of those games I could see in every single toy store across the English-speaking world. Number 63, Space Corp. I love sci-fi as a theme, and space exploration in particular. And Space Corp is a wonderful space exploration game. It's quite a heavyweight game, but that's also because it's pretty damned ambitious. One of the things that sets it apart from a lot of other games is it goes in 3 eras. In the first era, you're exploring the inner solar system. The second era, the outer solar system, and finally, you're doing interstellar exploration. So it goes over this huge scale and scope. It's one of those games that at the end you will feel a genuine sense of achievement for what your corporation has built and how far you've explored out. Number 62, Star Realms. The great thing about Star Realms is it's just a really simple, basic deck builder, but there's enough to keep you engaged, and the games are quick and deadly and brutal. It gives you the experience of playing a collectible card game, but you just sit down and start playing. There's none of that pre-build you have to do. And if a game goes badly, that's okay because it's all over and done with in minutes. It's a fast-paced, fast game that takes on the best parts of deck building and none of the bloat. Number 61, Dead of Winter, a Crossroads game. Dead of Winter is a cooperative game about an outpost in a zombie apocalypse. Each of you is leading a small faction of survivors within this outpost as you're struggling to survive and thrive. The main twist in Dead of Winter, though, is that each of you has your own personal goals and ambitions as well. This creates a lot of tension between players, as you'll have limited resources, but some players will feel the need to hoard them. Dead of Winter also has an incredibly strong narrative in it, with one of the best collections of stories and encounters of any game made. My one side issue with the game is that the tone can vary dramatically, as some encounters can be about starving children, while others are about Skippy the Wonder Dog. That aside, the writing is consistently good, and if you do want a game where there is tension and there is narrative and story, definitely check it out. Number 60, Museum. Museum is a set collection game about building collections in a museum, one of the most obvious themes in board gaming really, so I'm surprised there aren't more museum-themed games. Museum's core gameplay loop is really good. It's basically tracking down items you need for various collections you want to make in your museum. But what makes Museum great to me are 2 things. First of all, it's absolutely gorgeous. The whole presentation and art in this game is top notch. And the other thing is that you can take cards from other people's discards. So there's this element of sniping and stealing that goes on in Museum that I find really, really interesting. Definitely worth trying out if you want a pretty set collection game with a little bit of interaction, but not too much. Number 59, Hostage Negotiator. Now this isn't the core Hostage Negotiator game that I'm talking about here, it's like the whole Hostage Negotiator series. The small box itself, that's a fine game, but Hostage Negotiator is one of those games that leans heavily on its extra content. In particular, all of the extra abductors and the new career mode. These both take what was essentially a basic solo dice chucking game and turn it into a proper narrative story game. Now there's reasons why you're doing these negotiations. Now a lot of people say of the core mechanics that they're too luck driven, and I actually disagree with that. There are a lot of luck mitigations in Hostage Negotiator. People just tend to overlook them a fair bit. So while the core game is fun and all, it's really all those extras that takes Hostage Negotiator to the next level. Number 58, Churchill. A lot of games are about wars, but Churchill takes on the topic of the Second World War in a completely different way. It's about the conferences held between the United States, the British Empire, and the Soviet Union. In a lot of ways, the war itself here is a sideshow to deciding how the world looks like after the war. A unique 3-player negotiation game. There's nothing quite like Churchill that I've played. Unfortunately, it's just one of those games that's hard to get on the table and get people enthused about, but it's absolutely genius and a unique take on this major and significant conflict. Number 57, Android Netrunner. This is the best competitive CCG or LCG I've ever played. Not only is it set in an amazing world with really rich characters and a great backstory, the gameplay is absolutely compelling. When you're playing the runner, you're fearful of what the corporation can throw at you and what the security systems do. And as the corporation, you're worried about how easy the runner can just cut through your resources. There's just great amounts of tension in a game of Netrunner. The sad thing is, this one's out of print, probably not coming back into print anytime soon, and if it does, it'll come back with a cyberpunk theme or something else. And I said it earlier in the video, but I really want to see an Android game based on the Arkham Horror LCG system instead. We might not get new content for this great game, but I feel there's a lot more that the Android universe can give out. You can still play this one online though, and the fan base has been creating cards and content for it. Number 56, Pandemic: The Cure. This is the DICE version of Pandemic, and it's the version of Pandemic I like the most. And the main reason for that is that the characters feel really different. Each of them comes with their own set of dice and their own unique actions. And the different combinations of powers make a huge difference in how the game plays each time. Far more so than I feel in regular Pandemic. Of course, it's just as brutal and merciless as the original Pandemic, perhaps more so, and you can lose pretty easily with some terrible rolls very early on. But it's quick to set up, it's quick to play, and it has a high level of replayability and variety. Number 55, Defenders of the Last Stand. Defenders of the Last Stand is a cooperative game where you are defending a central base against 4 different types of marauders that want to destroy it. It combines a lot of the elements of Pandemic with games like Arkham Horror. And frankly, it's a bit of a mess, but it's a beautiful, wonderful, chaotic mess that generates stories and generates experiences. Sadly, this one is out of print, and like Agents of SMERSH by the same publisher, won't come back into print. But it looks as though the core ideas are being resurrected for Freedom 5, which uses the same core ideas as Defenders of the Last Stand, but sets it in the Sentinels of the Multiverse universe. So I'm going to keep a real close eye on that one. Number 54, Lords of Hellas. Lords of Hellas is an area control game with multiple ways to win and evolving powers. And one of the things I really love about this game is how your powers evolve throughout the game. You get to draft in new cards, and they make a substantial difference in how you play. There are also various gods and monsters you can swap in and out that give different bonuses and effects. And the multiple paths to victory mean that no one's ever really out of this game. Lords of Hellas also has incredible table presence and plays a lot faster than it initially looks. It is one of those games, if you're going to spend the time to set it up, you might as well play 2 games back to back. And the models and presentation are just fabulous. Number 53, Above and Below. As far as I'm aware, Above and Below is still the only game that combines worker placement and storytelling. And it combines it in a wonderfully quaint way. In Above and Below, you're creating a township above the surface, but you can explore below into the cave network and have a whole series of wacky encounters. This all combines to create a unique and charming game. I'm not sure it's the most well-balanced game because it seems that not exploring and just focusing on the surface tends to win more often, but it's definitely a game that you play for its experience more than its competitive knife-edge gameplay. Number 52, Potion Explosion. This is one of the most satisfying games to play. Just pulling the marbles out of the dispenser and hearing the wonderful clink clank clink as the marbles come down and realizing how clever you've been to get the maximum amount of marbles out of the dispenser and use them wisely. It's just really satisfying experience. It's also one that's quite approachable, and this is a game I've played with casual gamers and they've really liked it as well. Yet there's enough in here with all of the different effects from the different potions, plus all the expansion material, that it can engage people who are more serious with their gaming. It's a lots of fun, super thinky puzzle game, but it's the tactile nature of it that takes it over the top for me. Number 51, Black Orchestra. Black Orchestra takes on a really serious topic and a really serious theme, and creates a unique co-op experience. Unlike a lot of firefighting co-ops where there's a whole series of problems popping up every turn that you have to deal with, Black Orchestra has one problem and one problem only: killing Hitler. And this comes down to planning and executing the perfect attack. And while critics of the game say it only comes down to one dice roll, fans of the game say it only comes down to one dice roll. And that dice roll, that final attempt to execute Hitler, is one of the most tense and exciting moments in gaming. Number 50, Le Havre. I've had this game for years and it just keeps getting better and better every time I play it. At its core, it's about running a shipping company in Le Havre, collecting resources, using local buildings, and trying to maximize every single action you can. And it's the tightness of the engine building inside Le Havre that really appeals to me. And each and every time I play it, at the end I'm like, man, that was a tight game. That was so good. So if you are looking for an engine building game with a really down-to-earth theme that's got lots of replayability in it and lots you can sink your teeth into, look at Le Havre. Number 49, Spheres of Influence. I've talked about Spheres of Influence in previous videos, and I'll say the same thing again. This is Risk, but better. It's like someone took the Risk game and took away every bad thing about it and replaced them with good things. So if you like the idea of Risk, if you like Risk, if you played Risk and went, I want to play a better game than that, play Spheres of Influence. I know this is not an easy one to get your hands on these days. Hopefully it comes out for a reprint. Hopefully we generate enough demand to see it back in stores, because Spheres of Influence is an absolutely fantastic reimagining of the classic Risk. Number 48, CIRCADIANS First Light. Speaking of games that get better the more and more you play them, CIRCADIANS First Light has grown on me over this last year, and one of the reasons for that is its superb solo mode. Now, as a multiplayer game, it's an excellent dice worker placement game, but as a solo game, it's positively sublime. And with 2020 being the year of solo gaming, CIRCADIANS has shot up a lot in my estimation over the last year. What probably works best in CIRCADIANS for me is that the core gameplay is really solid. It's solid dice worker placement and all these available options. But what sets it apart for me are the variable player powers. Each of them is really strong and they give you a different play style each time you play. And I really like that in an engine builder. I like that you're not starting at the same point A each time. That different paths will generate different rewards based on who you're playing, and CIRCADIANS absolutely nails that. So a very good game for groups, but an excellent game solo. Number 47, Kolejka. Kolejka is a Polish game about queuing during the shortages in the late Cold War. Now that might sound absolutely grim and miserable, but Kolejka is an experience. It's satire done well. It takes the absolute lunacy of that period and teaches about it, but teaches about it in a fun and engaging way. There's something highly entertaining about jumping the queue because you brought a baby along. It might not actually be your baby. Or kicking someone out of line because they were talking bad about the party. The strange mix of grimness and whimsy make Kolejka a really fascinating and unique experience. And the core gameplay is just super fun. Messing about with queues, screwing with people, it has a really high level of take that in it. And if you like games where you get to screw your friends over, this is one to definitely consider if you can track it down, as I understand it's gone out of print. Number 46, Yokohama. Yokohama is a game about running a company during the Meiji Restoration in Japan. Now that's the period in Japan's history where they went from feudalism to industrialism in about a 40-year period. It's one of the most fascinating periods of human history in any country, just the dramatic amount of social change. And Yokohama does quite a good job of showing these startup companies, this new world of enterprise that you're getting involved with. And it just feels different to most economic games. This is one I've enjoyed more and more each time I've played it, and there's a lot to Yokohama. It's a deep game, and it's like a sandbox. When you start off, there's this open board full of possibilities, and you have to sort of come up with your own approach of how you're going to build your company and what you're going to do. Definitely want to try out if you like Euro games, if you like economic games, and if you like games that give you way too many options. Number 45, Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe is all about being trapped on a cursed island. It's a survival game that uses a combination of worker placement mechanics and dice-based risk systems. You never have enough actions in Robinson Crusoe to do everything you want, so you have to take risks. And those risks invariably lead to terrible consequences, like getting eaten by tigers or dying alone and cold in the rain. Robinson Crusoe is brutal, it's unforgiving, but it's one of those games that when you do survive the cursed island, you get a legitimate sense of triumph and achievement. And like other games I've mentioned, like Dawn of the ZEDS, it will kick your ass over and over again. But you'll come back because that triumph of winning a game of Robinson Crusoe is so immensely satisfying. It's deep, it's complex, it's rich, but it is rewarding if you're willing to put the time in to learn this complex and involved game. Number 44, Suburbia. This city building game from Biza Games has all of the things I love in Castles of Mad King Ludwig and none of the ones I don't like. The game flows really well and it's all about making the optimal decision you can with the information right in front of you to get the best, prettiest, sexiest, most powerful city you can. I picked up the collector's edition and there's a lot to love about that. Mostly the production values, how good the new tiles look, but it's also a little overwhelming because I really only like playing the core game and perhaps the first expansion. But still, if you are looking for a city building game, this is one of the best available. It's probably one to avoid if you don't like doing math because each of the tiles interacts with each other and that changes each turn. But if you're not concerned about that basic math, this is an absolutely fun city builder. Number 43, Cthulhu Wars. I really like Cthulhu Wars. I really like how it takes asymmetric powers, different paths to victory, and all this randomness and chaos and puts it into an area control game and makes it compelling and interesting. If there is a problem with Cthulhu Wars, it's that they didn't have an editor. The core game with one or two extras, like a couple of extra factions, is absolutely amazing. But there's just too much stuff for Cthulhu Wars, and the last couple of times I've played it, it's been a little bit overwhelming to keep track of all of the extra old ones and all of the extra bits and pieces. So my high regard for Cthulhu Wars is for the core gameplay, with the core factions and maybe a couple of the extras. And honestly, you don't need to spend the thousands of dollars to get all the Cthulhu Wars stuff, because most of it makes the game worse, not better. And that's a real shame because the core game is so well done. It is so excellent, it's so tight, and it's so fun. And in many ways, Cthulhu Wars is one of the best area control games ever made. But like a highly tuned sports car, the more things you bolt onto it, the more armor you weld to it, the more machine guns you strap on top of it, the slower it's going to go. Number 42, Crisis. Crisis is a tight, nasty, brutal, vicious worker placement game about trying to maximize your profit during a collapsing economy. It's hard to say bad things about this game because it takes on a really cool idea about riding an economic collapse and profiteering off it, and delivers on that premise expertly. And one of the cool things in Crisis is you can't ride the economy too far or else it will totally collapse, and that ends the game immediately. So there's some brinksmanship, there's some semi-cooperative elements to this as well, as you want to take the most money out of the economy that you can without totally trashing the economy. And every single bad decision in Crisis is punished mercilessly. This is a game that rewards expert play and repeat play. So if you are a fan of Euros and you want something a little different that's a bit more confrontational and a bit more nasty, definitely check out Crisis. It is superb. Number 41, Power Grid. Power Grid is a game about building power plants and power networks across different countries. And I've personally never played a bad game of Power Grid. This is such a good standard standby game that I'm happy to play each and every time it hits the table. Power Grid also has great escalation throughout the game as you move through the different stages, where your board presence evolves and changes. At the start, only one person can be in each city, but by the end of the game, up to 3 players can share networks. And it's how the game evolves and plays out each time that I just find really captivating and interesting. Power Grid is definitely one to try out if you like the idea of building networks, getting good deals at auctions, and playing the market. Number 40, Sidereal Confluence. I love Sidereal Confluence, but this was not the year for a game of it. This is an economic real-time trading game where everyone's economy is completely and utterly screwed, but everyone else has all the stuff you need to prosper. It's a game about wheeling and dealing, about creating opportunities and recognizing how different economies work and their strengths and weaknesses. Sidereal Confluence is a fascinating and unique experience. it's just not necessarily a great experience in 2020. There's a new edition out that looks really good as well, and I'd love to pick up a copy, but this is a game that very much comes into itself at the 5, 6, 7 player mark or more. So really only pick it up if you've got a group that will buy into its complexity, its playtime, and its player count. But if you do have that group, this could be one of the most rewarding games ever made. Number 39, Gloomhaven. Now this rating includes Jaws of the Lion as well, because while they are technically separate games, they kind of aren't. And one could easily view Jaws of the Lion as the tutorial model for Gloomhaven. There is a lot to love in Gloomhaven. It is a fantastic dungeon crawler. It has one of the deepest settings of any game I've ever played, and my main criticism about it is there's too much content, and that's really a trifling thing to say about a game, that there's too much good. It's far and away my favourite fantasy dungeon crawler, and really it's the unique classes and how their skill cards work that really make Gloomhaven hum for me. The main reason it isn't higher on my list is I just don't have the time to commit to playing it enough. It's one of those games where you kind of have to go all in to really get the most out of it. Number 38, Empires of the Void 2. A beautiful looking 4X science fiction game that sets out to create an experience like Twilight Imperium in a far shorter time. One great thing about Empires of the Void 2 is that the worlds aren't just random worlds, they're not just numbers and resources. Each world has its own character and its own events and backstory. And this makes the world of the game feel lived in, something you don't get in some other 4X type games. And while it doesn't quite deliver that epic Twilight Imperium experience, it does deliver about 80% of that experience in 20% of the time. Number 37, Arkham Horror the card game. The Arkham Horror card game stands out because it's a cooperative game, and it's the closest a card game has come to feeling like a role-playing game of anything I've ever played. In some ways it feels more like a dungeon crawler that just happens to be a card game. And one of my favourite ever gaming experiences is the full campaign of the Dunwich Horror that we played for Arkham Horror the card game. The downside is I haven't got any of the cards after the Dunwich Horror, and due to its model of constantly releasing content and drip feeding that content, it's quite tricky to get back into it once you stop playing. I really wish they would just get rid of the plastic packs and put out each cycle in one box. If they did, I'd probably get back into Arkham Horror and it would probably shoot back up the charts, because it does deliver such a unique and captivating experience. I just can't be bothered with its business model of drip feeding the content one pack at a time every month. Number 36, Horrified. This was my foundation game of the year last year, and it continues to move up the ratings. I actually got my own copy of this as well. Thank you, Conan, for that late birthday present. It was most appreciated. Horrified is just a wonderful family-friendly co-op game that executes its theme perfectly, doesn't overstay its welcome, and isn't overly complex. Yet there's enough depth here to engage people. The Universal Monsters was not a theme that I thought would resonate with me well, but it has, it absolutely has. And this is very much a pandemic killer, the kind of game you can play with just about anyone and have a good time. Number 35, Everdell. Everdell is a beautiful worker placement, engine building, card drafting game about woodland critters building the perfect woodland paradise. And it looks like a flashy, over-the-top, overproduced game, but there is a really solid, fun game underneath that. I love playing this with the Pearlbrook expansion. That to me makes the game a lot better. And I'm looking at the other expansions and thinking, I'm not sure if the game needs these. I'm pretty content with where it is. But Everdell's in that nice space of being just heavy enough to be super engaging to serious gamers, but not so overwhelmingly intimidating that casual gamers are put off by it. It's not just cute animals on cards. There's a seriously good and deep game here as well. Number 34, Santorini. Santorini is a quick-paced abstract game about maneuvering and building towers. And its core rules are wonderfully simple. You can teach them in a minute or two. But then the game has a chess-like depth to it, and every single game you play evolves and plays out differently. And while Santorini has all of these special powers you can play with that modify the game, the core game of Santorini without powers is excellent in and of itself. Number 33, Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. Arkham Horror 2nd Edition in many ways is the genre-defining game for the Arkham Files. It's a sprawling, mad, chaotic game with far too many expansions and way too much going on and a whole bunch of little sub-rules, but it's another story generator, and if you've been paying attention, you would have noticed that I love games that create moments and create stories. And Arkham Horror 2nd Edition does this naturally. Because of the way events and encounters unfold, no game will ever be quite the same. And while I don't play it as much as I used to, Arkham Horror 2nd Edition will always have a fond place in my heart. And if you want to know more about Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, check out our long-form retrospective on Arkham Horror, The Rearview. Number 32, Millennium Blades. Millennium Blades is a really tricky game to explain to people. It's about being a character in a TV show about a collectible card game, while also just being a collector of collectible card games and playing in collectible card game tournaments. And if you're still confused by this explanation, what it's about is people who play games like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! You're one of them. You're playing in tournaments, you're collecting cards, you're throwing money around, and you're trying to build the most competitive tournament deck possible to win the tournament and get the exclusive rewards. And it's utter chaos and madness. This is a wonderfully unique game that offers an experience you're not going to get anywhere else. Number 31, Brass Birmingham. Last year there were no train games in this list. Now there are 2. Because historically I've considered train games to be, frankly, as dull as dishwater. Brass Birmingham really changed that for me this year. It's not a plodding experience, it's quite fast paced, and it's all about opportunism. And I wasn't expecting that going into playing it. Where Brass really shines is that you have to have some long-term plans, but it's really about how you maximize your short-term opportunities that will determine your success throughout it. It's all about building networks, collecting resources, and playing them at just the right time to maximize your return. There's lots of ways to score points in Brass Birmingham, and the board evolves completely organically based on player decisions. And it's that high degree of interactivity, that great mix between strategy and opportunism, and the tightness and pacing of the game that makes Brass Birmingham a real classic, and one of my favorite new games this year. Number 30, Leaving Earth. Leaving Earth is a deep and complex and rich game about space exploration. It's about getting the first person into space, sending probes to Mars and Venus, creating a space station, and finally building a colony on places like Ceres or the surface of Mars. Leaving Earth is deep, it's rich, it's complex, it's complicated, sometimes it's mathematical and a bit like running a spreadsheet, but it's so involved that you just get drawn into it. And it has this wonderful risk-based system. Every single piece of technology will come with a set of outcomes, whether they are fails or successes. And removing successes costs more money than removing failures. Leaving Earth is absolutely the game for people who like things like Kerbal Space Program, who aren't afraid of mathematics, and who want a really serious and straight take on space exploration and running a space program. Number 29, The Captain is Dead. The Captain is Dead is a cooperative game about the last minutes of a sci-fi show. The captain's being killed by raiders and everything's going to hell, and you or the rest of the crew trying to get the ship to escape. I've talked about firefighting co-ops before, where there's a whole bunch of stuff going wrong and you have to manage your resources and deal with them. The Captain is Dead is very much one of those firefighting co-ops, but what makes it work for me is how fast it is and how relentless it is. And along with that rapid pacing, it just captures that Star Trek homage that it's going for. A really fun game. The sequels are good too, they're just not quite as good as the original The Captain is Dead, which is the one I recommend here. Number 28, Healthy Heart Hospital. Healthy Heart Hospital is a bag manipulation game about running a hospital. Now, bag manipulation's not a common mechanic. You start off with a whole bunch of different colored cubes in a bag, and then you decide which ones to return. So it's kind of like a bag builder, but the bag resets each turn, and your actions are trying to strip bad results out of the bag and change the complexion of the bag to suit what you want to do. And it's a game chock-block full of micro decisions. For every action you take, you'll be putting some stuff back in the bag, and every decision shapes how that bag works. It's marketed as a co-op game, but really it is very much a solo game that can be played co-op as well. And I'm really hoping that 2021 brings a second edition of Healthy Heart Hospital, because it's a game I thoroughly enjoy, and it's a game I think deserves a new edition. Number 27, Spartacus, a game of blood and treachery. Now, the Spartacus show was shot in New Zealand, and I did really like the show as well. It had a lot of familiar faces in it, and it was just pulpy and hammy and wonderful and cheesy. And the game is also pulpy and hammy and wonderful and cheesy. It's a game about fighting gladiators, but also about screwing over the other gladiatorial owners. In Spartacus, you will betray your friends and allies with terrible, terrible schemes. You will fight it out in the arena, and you'll also potentially take a dive in the arena in order to make more money. Spartacus is not a game for people who cannot handle backstabbing and betrayals and wheeling and dealing. But if that is your jam, and it is my jam, there's a good chance you'll have a lot of fun with it. Number 26, Blood Bowl Team Manager. Blood Bowl Team Manager is sadly out of print and likely will not come back into print, which is a real pity because it's a super fun card game based on the classic Games Workshop Blood Bowl. What Blood Bowl Team Manager does is capture the feeling of owning, running and developing a Blood Bowl team and compresses that into about 60 to 90 minutes gameplay. The turns are fast and furious, and it's full of interactions despite being essentially a deck builder. Sadly, this one's just going to get more and more difficult to get your hands on as time goes by. Number 25, Paladins of the West Kingdom. The chunkiest game Garphill's put out to date, and my favourite out of all of them. Paladins of the West Kingdom is a deep, complex engine building game about maximizing the amount of actions you can get out of a limited amount of resources. What makes Paladins stand out for me is how interconnected everything in the game is. You cannot just excel at one thing, you've got to excel at multiple things. And how the different tracks and advancements interact with each other make a huge difference to your final score. Paladins also has an exceptionally good solo mode. So it's been a game I've played a fair bit more in 2020. Definitely one for people who like heavier games, as it is a bit of a table hog and it does take quite a bit of time to play. Number 24, The Manhattan Project, Energy Empire. Another really tight worker placement game with a lot of engine building built in and a fantastic theme. You play as different nations in the second half of the 20th century trying to solve their power and infrastructure needs. Will you use oil and coal, or will you attempt to go to cleaner, greener, hydro and solar power plants? Energy Empire is a worker placement game where you're never totally locked out of using a spot, you just have to pay more to use it. And that means you're never prevented 100% from taking an action, but you have to weigh up whether the cost you pay is worth the benefits you'll get back. Sadly, the owner of the publisher of Energy Empire, James Maith, passed away last year, and that's left the expansion for this game somewhat in limbo, so I'm not sure what future the Manhattan Project Energy Empire has. Here's hoping that the estate and everything is sorted out, because this is a really great game and I'm really excited to see what the expansion can deliver. Number 23, Chinatown. Chinatown is a game all about trading. Each of you represents a different family, and you have different access to different lots in the city and different shops, and you have to make mutually beneficial trades to get the best outcomes. Chinatown is a fantastic trading experience, and if you're a group that likes negotiating and haggling over prices, you can have a really good time out of this one. The only fly in the ointment is the theme is pretty dated and kind of awkward at times. I'd really like to see a sci-fi revisit of Chinatown sometime in the future. But despite that slight wrinkle in the game, this is still a fantastic trading game, one that's super easy to learn, super easy to teach, and one that will lead to a lot of high energy talk around the table as people trade properties back and forth, trying to get the best outcomes they can for themselves. Number 22, Between Two Cities. This game is competitive, but it's also cooperative, as you are trying to win the game for yourself. But to do that, you have to build two cities, one each with a player to your left and right. And it's this cooperation that makes Between Two Cities such a fun and unique experience, because every interaction in this game is positive. Yes, each of you is trying to win the game, but you can only do that by collaborating with the player to your left and right and trying to build the best city between you. The playtime's really short and the rules are quite simple, and this is an excellent game for your collection if you're planning on teaching board games to new people. And it's just a game that always has a positive outcome at the end, because you've worked together to create a set of cities. Number 21, Seven Wonders. Seven Wonders is a card drafting game played over 3 eras, where for each era you get 7 cards. So in this game you'll take 21 actions and that's it. And what you take in these 21 actions is heavily determined by what group you're playing and what the player to your left and right are doing. Seven Wonders crams in a lot of decisions into its short runtime, and there are heaps of different ways to score points. The different civilizations also play differently with their own unique upgrade path, and generally this is just a great accessible game with a heck of a lot of decisions that you have to make crammed into such a short time. There's a reason it sold a gazillion copies over the last 10 years. Number 20, Gaia Project. Take everything I said about Terra Mystica, but make it betterer. And that's the best way to describe Gaia Project. Well, it's not actually. Gaia Project isn't as similar to Terra Mystica as most people make out. It's like both games start at the same point, but head off in very different directions. Gaia Project has its technologies, which work very differently to anything in Terra Mystica. And Terra Mystica is much more about being close to your opponents, whereas Gaia Project, you kind of want to spread out a bit more. But still, Gaia Project is one of those games that rewards advanced planning. It rewards looking at how you can score points, how your faction works, and mapping out just precisely what you want to do. And just hoping that no one gets in your damned way. It's a clever game for clever people. Number 19, Azul. Azul is a tile laying game about laying tiles and scoring points for it. And that might sound really, really, really dull, but trust me, it's not as dull as it sounds. Azul's a beautiful looking game that's just a bit of a mind bender too, as you're constantly trying to maneuver the best tiles onto your board while forcing poor picks onto your opponents. It's like playing games with the upper class. It has the appearance of civility, but under the skin it's cold, ruthless, and merciless. Azul is one of Steph and I's favourite games, and one that hits the table quite a bit. It's also one we've taken around to play with members of the family. So if you're after a fine looking abstract game that you can play with practically anyone, Azul's a good pick for you. Number 18, Xia, Legends of a Drift System. Xia is a sprawling space adventure about becoming space famous. You start off with a little ship and a whole bunch of possibilities. And you just roam around the galaxy, exploring, becoming a pirate, becoming a trader, becoming a courier, and doing a whole bunch of other missions. Xia is my single favourite sandbox game. And that's a game where there's not a clear path to victory. You can just kind of do whatever you want. And really the point of these games is not to win, it's just to explore and have fun. Xia's also really gorgeous with its dinky plastic ships, and it's a massive table hog. Number 17, Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. Mansions of Madness blends a traditional dungeon crawler with the Arkham Files tone and setting. What makes Mansions stand out for me is the app integration. This is a game where the app is the game master, and that allows you to legitimately explore things. Because at the start of each scenario, you might only have one room revealed and a few clues about what to do next. Mansions of Madness is one of the few games that legitimately makes you feel like you are exploring. Definitely one to get if you want a dungeon crawler that doesn't require someone playing the game master. Number 16, Underwater Cities. Underwater Cities is a worker placement game about building a network of underwater cities. But what makes it such a great game for me is just how tight it is. You have 30 actions each game, and you have to absolutely maximize each and every single one of them. But the game maneuvers you into positions where you just cannot do that, so you have to make the best out of bad situations all the time. An intense, thinky game that relies on a great combination of strategic planning along with short-term opportunism. Underwater Cities is definitely a heavy one though, and it does take quite a bit of time. But if you want a game that lasts a couple of hours, where every single decision counts, give it a go. Number 15, Roll for the Galaxy. The dice version of the classic Race for the Galaxy, and my favourite of the 3 games in the Galaxy series. So that includes Race for the Galaxy and New Frontiers. What I like about Roll for the Galaxy is it's fast-paced, really tactile with all those dice you're throwing around, and there's so many different engines you can build. And the playtime is really short. I've seen some people say it takes longer to teach than it does to play. That's really only a problem if you plan on playing a game once before moving on to the next one. Roll for the Galaxy is one of those games you can play over and over and over again. Definitely recommend playing with the first expansion though. It adds an awful lot to Roll for the Galaxy. Number 14, Argent the Consortium. Now, one of the tropes about worker placement is that it's passive-aggressive, and Argent the Consortium, it's just plain aggressive. This game is set in a wizard's college, and the Chancellor has just resigned. You're one of the senior mages there, and you're all campaigning against each other to win the job of Chancellor. And that campaigning is brutal, bloody, and backstabbing. Argent is really busy, and there's a lot going on, but I can sum the game up with this. No other worker placement game just allows you to fireball a room to clear everyone else out of it. You can do that in Argent. And I just love the messiness, the backstabbing and brutality of the gameplay. It's wonderful. Number 13, Block by Block, the Insurrection game. Block by Block is a cooperative game about leading an urban uprising against an unjust regime and its police force. Block by Block has a strong political message, and you just have to look at the unrest in the United States in 2020 to see what this game's about. As a game though, it is a wonderful co-op experience where each of you plays a different faction, and only by working together to occupy key parts of the city can you force the authorities to yield to your demands. That said, this is a super political game, so if you're uncomfortable with the message and uncomfortable with the idea of the police cubes being white, definitely steer clear of it. But if you don't have incredibly thin skin and want an interesting and engaging co-op, definitely check it out. It's out of print at the moment, but it is available free, print and play, from the Out of Order Games website. Number 12, Nemesis. Now, I mentioned earlier I'm a big fan of the Alien movies, and Nemesis, without being an Alien game, is the best Alien game ever made. It's funny how that works out sometimes. Nemesis is about being trapped on a ship with monsters about, and one of the great unsung things about it is that you can play it fully cooperatively, or you can play it semi-cooperatively, and both versions of the game work equally well. I know some people have issues with the trader mechanic in the semi-co-op version. Just play it co-op. It's a great game co-op as well. But Nemesis is just a wonderful atmospheric experience, crawling around the ship, trying to complete your missions, and then trying to get out before the monsters get you, or someone locks you in a room on fire, or disables your escape pod. I am really looking forward to getting locked down when it comes out as well. And this time last year I didn't have my own copy, and I finally do, so I'm very happy about that. Number 11, Obsession. An action selection and deck building game about running a manor house in England. For those of you who don't know, this is my partner Stephanie's absolute favourite game, and I really like it too. It's incredibly tight and incredibly fun. It also has that rare thing of being a game that encourages silly table talk. If you've watched things like Gosford Park or Downton Abbey, you can just lean into that while you're playing and complain about the terrible Americans who have come to dinner that night. But silliness aside, Obsession is a really tight and well-tuned game. You have very limited actions and you have to make the absolute most of them. And there's many different ways to excel. There's objectives, there's buildings, there's getting expert guests, and finally courting and winning the hearts of the Fairchilds. Obsession's quickly become one of our favourite games, and it's really great to see the new second edition, which just ups the overall production quality of the game dramatically. And when Steph does her top 25 again, I'll eat my hat if this isn't number 1. Number 10, Anachrony, a worker placement game set in the far future where you've been warned by your future self of a calamity that is coming. And one of the cool things about Anachrony is that you can borrow resources from your future selves. It's sort of a weird loan system, but it makes sense in the narrative of the game. I love everything about how Anachrony is presented. From its strong core worker placement system, to being able to build actions inside your base, to the wonderful power suits, and just the tempo and feel and pacing of the game. For me, this is worker placement done as well as it can be, and it also has one of the great solo modes ever designed for a board game, the Chronobot. Another game I'm looking forward to getting more of this year as the expansion is coming out. Although like some games, I'm not sure if Anachrony needs more stuff. It almost feels like the core game is peak worker placement for me. So yeah, if you want a tight, excellent worker placement game that looks absolutely breathtaking, consider picking up Anachrony. Number 9, Paths of Glory. This game just keeps growing on me each and every time we play it. It's a card-driven game about the First World War, and it's quite a heavy, serious war game about a very serious war. And what makes Paths of Glory work for me is how you feel the pressure of those leaders in that war. Attacking on the Western Front's just an awful idea in terms of human life and human casualties, but the game makes you feel compelled to do it, reluctantly. You're also constantly driving for that great breakthrough just to crack the lines and then march through to Berlin or march through to Paris. And yet that breakthrough very rarely comes as the game settles down, especially in the West, into attritional war. Paths of Glory models the First World War in a fascinating way, but in a way that allows you to create your own story of that war or reinterpret it. Definitely one for people who like serious war games. But for me, this is the best pure serious war game I've ever played. And yeah, it takes a long time to play and it's quite complex, but it is an amazing experience from start to finish. Definitely not for everyone though. Number 8, This War of Mine. And speaking of war games, This War of Mine deals with the consequences of war. It's a game about being a group of people trapped inside a city, not unlike Sarajevo, that is under siege. But the experiences of the characters in this war of mine could be replicated to Leningrad, or Aleppo, or Grozny. And what makes this war of mine work is that it tells personal stories from a personal perspective. You end up deeply caring about the fates of the individuals that you're looking after. These poor souls trapped in a broken down building while shelling goes on and snipers shoot people who go walking during the day. This war of mine is not a game designed to be won, it's a game designed to be experienced. Number 7, War of the Ring. A 2-player game that recreates the events of the Lord of the Rings, where one player is the Free Peoples trying to sneak the ring into Mordor and destroy it while holding the Shadow at bay, and the Shadow is just this rampaging force that wants to take over the human settlements or find and destroy the ring bearer. This game does an amazing job of setting up the preconditions of the War of the Ring, but then giving you the freedom to make your own decisions of where the Shadow is going to move or what the Free People are going to do. If your battle plan involves marching all the way past Gondor and sending your armies in to attack the Grey Havens in the Shire, you can do that. War of the Ring just captures the epicness of the Lord of the Rings, the whole sweeping story, and puts that into a game you can play in about 3 hours. If you're a fan of the movies or the setting or just want to play a good war game, definitely consider picking it up. Number 6, Battlestar Galactica. I have several gaming groups, and one of them is all friends of mine from a different city called Hamilton, and we've all moved to Wellington over the years. And Battlestar Galactica is that group's signature game. It's all about the backstabbing, it's all about the table talk, and it's all about the psychology. And we start calling each other Cylons before the loyalty cards are dealt out. Battlestar Galactica is incredibly group dependent, but if you have the right group that leans into the theme, that can handle being accused of things or being pushed into an airlock or locked in the brig for multiple turns, you will have an amazing experience with this. Sadly, this one's out of print, and I'm not sure it's coming back into print because of the license problems. But you can get a similar experience with a game called Dark Moon, which started life as a fan mod of Battlestar Galactica. Number 5, Twilight Struggle. A card-driven game about the Cold War. In Twilight Struggle, you play either the Soviet Union or the United States of America, battling over influence across the whole world. Twilight Struggle is a great 2-player game, and it's a game that forces you to make awful, compromising decisions throughout. One of the defining features of Twilight Struggle is you play with the same deck of cards, which contains your events and your opponent's events. And if you play a card with your opponent's event on it, it goes off. So some things you just cannot stop from happening, and that leaves you every turn with terrible decisions to have to make. But that's balanced out by the fact your opponent is making just as many terrible decisions. I've been playing Twilight Struggle for well over a decade, and it still holds up. It's still a great game. The single biggest problem with it is finding someone to play against. Number 4, Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds is a game by pandemic designer Matt Lecoq, and for me, this is by far the best game he's ever made. It's a cooperative game about running a rescue team. And in order to do these rescues, which are taking place all over the world, you have to have the right people, the right machinery, and the right tools in place at the right time. And that requires a lot of planning and coordination. And I really enjoy how the game makes you think 3 or 4 turns ahead. Unlike many other firefighting co-ops, in Thunderbirds, you don't just turn over a card and go, oh, that's the game done because things just blew up. You always have time to respond. And that's one of the reasons I really dig it. That and the fact that it executes its theme absolutely perfectly. And even if you aren't a fan of the Thunderbirds puppet show from the 60s, which, let's face it, today not many people would be, that doesn't really matter because the core game is so good and so fun. Number 3, Star Wars Rebellion. A character-driven war game about the original Star Wars movies. Rebellion is the sibling game to War of the Ring, where War of the Ring allows you to recreate Lord of the Rings, Star Wars Rebellion allows you to recreate the battles between the Rebel Alliance and the Galactic Empire. And the same things I love about War of the Ring, I love about Rebellion. It sets the game up at the start and allows you to tell your own compelling story. Will Obi-Wan Kenobi be turned to the dark side? Will Admiral Akbar lead a daring raid on Coruscant? Or will Lando Calrissian be frozen in carbonite? Rebellion does what I think a great war game should do. Allow you to recreate the war, but not on rails. You reinterpret it. You make your own decisions rather than just the decisions that were made during that conflict. It gives you the freedom to do what you want, to tell your own Star Wars story. And it does it really well. It's a beautiful looking game. I highly recommend the expansion though, because it improves the combat system. But really, it's just a super fun 3-hour sort of game. And one of the underrated things about Rebellion is the cat and mouse aspect of it. The figuring out where the rebel base is, or hoping that the Empire has no idea where you are. Rebellion has layers. It's not just battles and rolling dice, it's bluffing and psychology as well. And that's what elevates it above War of the Ring for me. But not by much. Number 2, Terraforming Mars. There's a lot of common themes in this list. Science fiction games, engine building games, games that give you multiple paths to victory. And no game does that better than Terraforming Mars. Terraforming Mars gives you a clear objective. Terraform the planet of Mars and get as many points as you can while doing it. But there's so many different ways you can go about doing that. And each of the different corporations gives you a different start point and a different playstyle. I have played this game countless times and I just cannot see myself not playing it in the future. And if I was to rate this list solely on amount of time spent playing a game, Terraforming Mars would be my number 1. But my number 1 is Spirit Island. It's Spirit Island. It was Spirit Island last year. It's Spirit Island this year. And that's just because I love everything about this game. Its cooperative nature, the setting it has, its anti-colonial theme, and its massive asymmetry. Each of the different spirits plays totally differently, and I've not played a game that has that same level of asymmetry. It works equally well cooperatively or playing it solo with multiple spirits. And it has this wonderful pacing, this rising tension where as the colonists expand, so do the powers of your spirits. And it's its richness and depth that keeps bringing me back to it. I am really looking forward to getting a copy of Jagged Earth, and I'm really looking forward to the expansion that comes after that. There is so much more that Spirit Island can offer, and I'm really excited to see where this incredibly great game goes over the next few years. Well, that's our list, and here's that t-shirt I mentioned at the start of the video. This will be available in the store right now, and the discount code will be valid until the end of the year. What games did you agree with on this list? What games did you go, what the hell are you thinking putting that there? What games do you reckon I should play? What games have I missed? What games do you reckon I'd like? Which game caused you to flip out with rage and start typing on your keyboard? Let me know about all this in the comments. And a reminder that 3 Minute Board Games does not take money from publishers. We keep going from YouTube ads, from Patreon, and from the support from Board Game Atlas. If you want to see more quality content from us, please come support us on Patreon. And if you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button, and come support us on Patreon.